by People G2, a nationwide leader in background checks and employment screening solutions. People G2 gives their clients access to the best human capital management and due diligence tools available. They are dedicated to helping their clients with all of their people-related decisions. To learn more, go to www.peopleg2.com. Talent Talk centers on the topics of talent recruitment and management, leadership development, company culture, and employee engagement. These are all timely topics for CEOs, entrepreneurs, HR professionals, and business leaders. We hope that as you tune in to listen each week, whether to the live broadcast or to the podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio, that you hear something you can take away that will help you grow and impact your career in a positive way. And now, here's the host of the Talent Talk Radio Show, the founder and CEO of People G2, Chris Dyer.
Good afternoon and welcome to Talent Talk. I'm excited to have you back in here for our first show of the month, and it happens to be International Women's Day, and we have one of my favorite women to have back on the show here today. We'll get to her in a second, but if this is the first time you're kind of running into this radio show and you're wondering what the heck we're doing here and why is it that we have these interviews and talk to these great people, it's really because I am fascinated by what smart people are thinking about, always trying to learn something from them to see if there's something they're thinking about, something they're worried about, maybe a book that they've read. And if I can't glean some bit of wisdom from their amazing brains, then I can take that into my own life and hopefully be better for my staff, be better for my family, be better for my friends, or whatever that may be. So that's sort of why the radio show started, because I was having all these amazing conversations. And one day we said, why not do this on the air? Why not allow other people to hear the conversation so they might be able to learn? Maybe they have questions or they have comments. And so I've been really, really blessed to have some amazing people on the show. A lot of the stories, a lot of the kind of best things that we've been able to capture, along with the stories of my own companies and my own sort of journey, have landed in two of my two best-selling books, The Power of Company Culture and then Remote Work. So if you're interested in checking those out, you can find them on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. And we're certainly going to be talking about books today because I know my guest today has a new book out, so which I'm really, really fascinated to find out more about. So we do Talent Talk on Tuesdays. We are not doing it every Tuesday anymore. We're sort of doing it on Tuesdays where we feel like doing it now. It's kind of our new 2022 attitude. We'll just do it when we want, do it when we feel like it. So you just make sure you're subscribing, especially if you're connected with me on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. It will let you know when we go live. Or if you prefer to listen after the fact, make sure you subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or Podbean or one of those where you can get the podcast afterwards. Okay, enough with all the business and the mumbo jumbo. Let's talk about who's on the show today for International Women's Day. My guest today, returning to the show, is Lynn Schmidt, PhD, consultant, coach, speaker, and author of the new book, Anti-Sexist, Challenge Sexism, Champion Women's Rights, and Create Equality. So let's go ahead and get started. Lynn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be back. It's been a few years.
It has been a few years. I know you're a highly accomplished and experienced talent management executive. You're a consultant. You're a coach focused on helping women achieve success. And of course, you are an author of award-winning and best-selling books. And we sort of mentioned what your current project is, which is Anti-Sexist. Why don't you tell a little bit about, to kind of remind everyone who you are, what you do, maybe kind of, what you've been working on kind of more recently since, or at least since we had you on the show last time. How do we get caught up here? What should we know?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of my career, and I think the last time I was on the show, I was still in corporate America. And most of my career, I've been heading up leadership development departments. And I'm also a certified leadership executive coach. A couple of years ago, I did leave corporate America, and basically I'm doing some consulting and coaching now on my own and spending a lot of time the last 2 years as we were shuttered due to COVID. I worked on the book Anti-Sexist and wrote that. And I think like COVID did with a lot of us, impacted us in different ways. It slowed me down, which was a good thing because the book ended up being global instead of local, and being sexism holistically versus just the workplace. So that was very very positive. So that's really what I'm up to now. I think the last time I was on the show, maybe it was to launch Shift into Thrive, which was my fourth book, and then Thriving from A to Z. So I stayed in the thriving mode for a while, and then Anti-Sexist comes specifically in on women, but it's a book for women and men.
So let's talk about that word. I've heard the word anti-racist, that kind of came out of a really good book, sort of post George Floyd and a lot of the social unrest that we sort of experienced during the time of COVID. If we didn't have enough to deal with, enough to think about, right? There was so many other challenges and things happening inside of society. And so I think your book is very, very timely because the conversation about sexism, I think, is getting I don't want to say a reboot, but it's certainly getting like a new light on it, right? Where it was a really, really big topic for a long time. And then we sort of did some things, or maybe we felt like we had some progress, and then it kind of lost its attention. At least this is my perspective. I may be wrong about this. And now it's sort of come back again. I think it's really, really important that it has. So maybe let's start with, how do we define being an anti-sexist, or what does that mean? Where are we trying to target? Or I don't know if you want to maybe define sexism, or you want to define anti-sexism, but let's kind of get the terms right for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first, defining sexism, it's biases or prejudices against women primarily. It's primarily women and girls are on the receiving end of sexism. And it comes from our biases and prejudices that come from maybe the town we grew up in, the country we grew up in, our family, our church life, the media is huge. But we get the biases that we have, what we believe stereotypically women, how they should behave. And the fact is, a recent United Nations study showed that 9 out of 10 people worldwide have deeply ingrained biases against women. And that's women and men. And if you don't have a deeply ingrained bias, you certainly have maybe an everyday stereotypical type of bias against women. So what I like to say is everybody is sexist, and we just need to own it and be okay with that, because that's only when we can do something about it. So that's what sexism is. We are all sexist. You can never get rid of your biases, but you can learn to manage them. And that's really what the book is to help with as well. Then in the middle there's what I would call non-sexist. It's the people who say, well, I'm not sexist, and maybe they manage their own biases, but they don't really step up to acknowledge or call out other people's biases. And so that's really non-sexist. And I say you can't be non-sexist. That's walking a fence that on this topic, there's no fence you should be walking. And so anti-sexist is where you're still sexist, because we all are. You're managing your own biases. In addition, you're stepping up, you're standing up, and you're taking actions to end sexism, whether it's being an ally in some way, whether it's when you hear, for men, for example, or women, because we are all sexist, you hear a friend say a stereotypical, maybe kind of demeaning remark. You don't necessarily get angry with them, but you say, well, what did you mean by that? And let me explain to you how that could be interpreted. And so that's really the sexist, and sexism is being sexist, non-sexist, which I say I'm not going to allow anybody to say they're non-sexist. And then there's anti-sexist, and that's really the stepping up and doing something about it.
So I noticed when if we want to reflect on this and compare it to racist behavior, I noticed a big shift in sort of in public or even private conversations, people being far less willing to allow someone to say things that were racist, right? To make offhand jokes, or to say something, even if it's just, oh, well, this person, these types of people can't do this, or they always do that, or whatever it was, and people would immediately get uncomfortable, right? So on that end, there was some progress there. But I haven't noticed quite that change yet as it relates to sexism. There can be, especially for women, there can be this sort of either they don't recognize it, they gloss over it, they don't call it out. Maybe it doesn't feel like it's as bad as being racist, but it's still, and I think this is the challenge that we have, that to your point, I'm sure everyone has faced some level of sexism or they've observed some level of sexism, regardless of your gender. But it is women that are specifically and consistently, I guess, sort of put into a really, really bad positions, right? This causes them to not make as much money, to not be able to provide for their families, to not have the same opportunities. Where when I think about sexism against men, it was like, well, why would a man be a nurse, or why would a man be a teacher? But that didn't stop them from becoming a nurse or stop them from becoming a teacher. That sort of sexism is wrong and it should not occur, but like it didn't stop them from doing the thing they needed to do. They just maybe had bad jokes or people act like jerks to them. Whereas I think if you turn that the other lens, like there's literally like women who are not able to do some very important things that would be like under Maslow's hierarchy, right? Because of behaviors and consistent sort of, I guess, bad actors against a very large group of people. Am I kind of categorizing that correctly? Is that how you would see it?
Yeah, that's exactly how I would see it. And I would say what you said about you're not hearing much about it. The fight against sexism has ebb and flowed. I mean, if you think about the 60s and everything that women were doing then, they had to come together. They had to fight, for those rights in men and women. And then if you think about the 80s, there were some laws passed to help women in the workplace, but it does ebb and flow. And right now there isn't very much being said about it. And I read a really interesting article that resonated with me that said women always take the back seat, meaning sexism. So even with racism, which is important and should be focused on, sexism is still taking the back seat. Women always take the back seat. And so it's not getting the recognition, but the numbers are getting worse. So that's one thing I talk about in the book. And one reason I wrote the book is harassment numbers are growing. Domestic abuse numbers are growing. Numbers, the length of time it's going to take to close the wage gap is growing. The length of time for women to get parity is growing. So all of those types of numbers that should be shrinking are growing, and other numbers that maybe should be growing, like number of women in management. The number of women, 27% worldwide in management, is the same since 1995. Yeah. Obviously, it varies around the world, but globally, the average is the same since 1995. So that's another thing about the book, is that I felt it was important to bring this to the forefront, because the numbers are getting worse. No one's paying attention to it. Women are once again, taking the back seat, and it has significant impact on their lives and costs to organizations and countries and nations and even, and children in particular. And then of course men as well, because they're often behaving in ways that towards women that doesn't make them feel good about it either.
Right. Well, I know in your book you talk about sort of the 4 outcomes of sexism. Maybe we could kind of walk through each one of those. I think the first one is the microaggression. So what is that? What should we be looking for there?
Yeah. So what I did with the book, when I decided to really look at it holistically, because what I found is, as I started looking closer and closer at sexism, is that people specialize in certain areas. So I'll explain microaggression, but you've got people specializing in microaggression. You've got people specializing in sexual harassment. You've got people specializing in how to be a male ally. You've got people specializing in domestic abuse. This information is everywhere, and there's just huge amounts of it. And what I wanted to do was pull something together that showed all of it holistically, so you could really understand the significant impact. So I created a matrix, a framework called the 4 outcomes of sexism. It's microaggression, discrimination, harassment, and violence. And microaggression is really where it starts. So if you think about the fact that we are all sexist, Microaggression are those daily, I like to say they're the daily paper cuts. They're the daily, often normalized things that we might say or think about women that hurt. You know, you hear it once, it hurts like a paper cut would, but women hear them daily. And so they build up and they truly scar and they impact, you know, mental health and well-being and all of those sorts of things. So it's terms we use, like, you know, women engineer, working mother, things you'd never say about a man. There's not equivalent words. Or bossy or pushy or aggressive when she's really just being assertive, you know, like a man would be. Ditzy, ballbuster, you know, bitch, you know, all those sorts of words and actions, you know, as well towards women. So those are microaggressions and they build up.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are all, I think it's important for people to understand that there are different types of sexism. It's not just, you know, one or the other. There are these different components. And so you might be not discriminating and not harassing and not being violent, but you could have these microaggressions, right? This could be where you need to think about your behaviors, or you need to think about the behaviors of those people you might be leading or managing, and making sure that we are creating that space that does not ignore or certainly not encourage. But I think one of the biggest problems I see is just it's sort of ignored, right? It's not really dealt with. And that becomes frustrating for women. You know, this would be interesting. I mean, do you think there's certainly a lack of women in leadership positions, as you pointed out? And I know a lot of people, and I've certainly been one of them, that would love to hire more women into leadership positions, but it's like the supply is quite low. And so why is the supply low? Is it that we are not developing women and helping them be successful into leadership positions when they start early in their career? Is it the, you know, behaviors and sort of the bad actors inside of companies that causes women to stop and to not continue, you know, inside of those organizations, so that then there isn't that supply, right, when it's the right time to put them in there? Or is it a lack of, you know, societal support when, you know, they have to step away if they're going to go have children and then come back to their careers? Or maybe this is a giant Venn diagram. It's a little bit of everything, right? But what are your thoughts on kind of why there's that supply issue right now?
I think it is a little bit of everything. And when you look at companies, you know, especially large companies are a good example. In non-management roles, typically, you've got 50% women working at an organization. The minute you start looking at the, you know, first level management, supervisory, senior management, executive, the numbers start to shrink and shrink and shrink. And so it's not really that in some cases, like I'll talk about STEM in a moment, there are cases where the talent pool isn't there, but that's because of sexism as well. But it's not, you know, if you look at leadership roles, it's not that the talent pool isn't there. It is that the internal, the sexism that can happen within organizations is not allowing women to progress. I mean, succession management meetings, often women won't be nominated. They won't be on, you know, on the list. And it's not because they don't have the capabilities or the talent. It's been shown that men often won't mentor or you know, sponsor women like they do. You know, we like right? We like people like us. And that gets into, you know, the biases as well and the sexism. So when you look at leadership, I think a lot of those things play a factor, as well as, you know, sexism in society before women even enter the home, the things they experience as girls and in school and other places that make them feel like they aren't good enough. They're not able to do that kind of work. And that really gets into STEM, you know, science, technology, engineering, and math roles. Whereas in school, girls are told, well, you're not good at math. You're not good at science. You shouldn't pursue these, where there's nothing that shows that that's true. And then if they do decide to pursue it in college, then they face all sorts of discrimination there in the coursework, because it's designed usually and structured for men. There can be often harassment when they're token females in a particular program. So I think all of those things can add to women not being or perceived as not being available to be in the roles.
Yeah, I remember seeing some research years ago. My wife's a teacher, and she was doing some research on this, and there was actually some benefit to early on sort of separating the boys and the girls for math and for science, because there was this sort of these microaggressions, and there was these comparisons and this sort of natural, I don't know, like sort of negative things happening, where immediately the boys were trying to puff themselves up and be really good at math, and the girls were willing to take a step back and just take, well, I'm not good at math. I didn't get this problem right. I got teased. I'm not good at math, and that's not true. And so removing sort of those gender tensions early on allowed them to be successful in a better environment, and then later on come back, like in high school or whatever, and be able to hold their own when they're in a much better, both genders are in a better place to be able to be cooperative together inside of a classroom setting. I don't think our schools are going to magically do that kind of radical change, but it is interesting that there is something going on from a very early stage in life that's causing some of these initial problems around how we think about math and science, leadership, and that has such an impact through our beliefs, through our biases, and through the outcomes, I think, for women inside of companies. Because you're right, if you look at the average company, you've got a pretty close 50-50 split between men and women if you just look at positions. But then you don't necessarily have that when you're looking at the leadership team.
Yeah. Exactly. And it is important to start early. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, parents can be well-intentioned, teachers can be well-intentioned, but they're still bringing their microaggressions to the table in ways that influence children. And then the earlier you can start to move children away from having those type of microaggressions, those type of biases that get expressed through microaggression, the better off we'll be, and the more likely we'll be able to change some of this.
Yeah, and I noticed this a lot when just in having a daughter and two sons, the difference in how people spoke to them, right? And and the things they would say she was pretty, they would tell the boys they were smart or they were tough, or like, but the language was very, very different. And again, people weren't being intentional. They were sort of subconscious about it. It wasn't like they were trying to deliver a message to her to, somehow mess her up for the rest of her life. But it was just sort of like, there was programming there on their part that they had never thought about. So, I was the jerk dad constantly calling it out, and then they would realize that they were saying it, and they hadn't put two and two together. But you're right, there's so much messaging just from those people around us about, and even in the gifts we give them, even in the things that we reinforce for both boys and girls, that continues sort of this, again, what's being delivered to boys in most cases is not harming them. It's actually pushing them up. And then what's sort of being delivered to young girls or women, it's sort of in some ways pushing them down for later success. And I think that's why your book is important. And this work and this sort of idea and this conversation is really important for us to be having in our workplaces, in our homes, in our schools. So I think it's perfect timing, and I really appreciate that you have sort of brought our attention back to this really important topic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and so much of it, as you said, I call it's been normalized. And then you think of the media. I mean, the Disney movies are getting better, but when you think about what the Little Mermaid taught girls, the wicked woman in the Little Mermaid told her she needed to be quiet so the prince would like her, right? And so it's the media and the headlines in the media and all of that is just feeds this sexism and that gets expressed in those microaggressions.
Yeah, not to mention she shouldn't talk, but she also had to totally leave her family, leave her entire world, change everything about herself just to be with a boy, right? Who did absolutely nothing to change or do anything. I mean, yeah, a lot of those stories are wildly problematic. I do appreciate they've done a really, really good job in the last decade of the stories being so much better. They're so much better in so many ways, but I think certainly in reinforcing better outcomes for boys and girls, they've upped their game, and that's probably because I'll bet you there's a lot more women writers and a lot more women involved in those movies that are being made. It was probably mostly male back if you're just looking at Disney movies and stuff. So
Hmm.
so what should we be thinking about? What's maybe kind of one or two things we could do right now to have an impact, to I guess be better for those people around us, and try to limit or eliminate any sexism that may be happening, that we can impact, that we can change.
Yeah. Well, when I think about the four outcomes, when you start with microaggression, one thing I like to emphasize is the build. So microaggressions, if they aren't called out, if they aren't stopped, there are some people where it will build either to discrimination or to harassment or both. And typically women and men are involved in microaggression and at a smaller scale discrimination. When you get into harassment and violence, that's typically men against women. But the key is if we don't call out and stop microaggression, there are certain people where they will then escalate to discrimination, or men that will escalate to harassment and then violence if it's not called out. So there is really an escalation pattern there where if we don't stop it early. The example I like to use, it was very tragic. You may have heard of Sarah Everard in England. It happened about a year ago, but a police officer actually on duty falsely arrested her, took her, raped her, and murdered her. And what was later found out is at the trial is that his buddies in the police force would laugh at him and joke with him when he would project violence on women and talk about women in horrible ways. They actually nicknamed him the rapist. And they just would joke about his behavior. He actually had been turned in for flashing a few times, and there were no repercussions. He wasn't held accountable. So that's just an example of how when microaggressions aren't stopped and called, there are certain people where they will feel, oh, it's okay for me to discriminate because others accepted my demeaning behavior towards women, or it's okay for me to harass because others accepted it. And then the harassment leads, horrifically often to violence.
Yeah.
So what can we do? I mean, I think we've got to stop it early on. It's standing up. It's managing our own behavior, acknowledging it first, and saying, yeah, I'm sexist, and I need to be aware of how that surfaces and how when I think things, they then might come out my mouth, and how can I stop that before it happens, and how it impacts my behavior, and call out others. When you hear it, when you see it. And then that stops it early on and working with children. But then if it moves to escalates to discrimination or harassment, that's where it's incredibly important to call it out, to stop it, to support women when that is happening, to be an ally.
Yeah, and that's super important, and I think we all can find a way to help. We can find a way to make an impact, and whether you feel like you're strong enough to do that or not, there is always some action, something we can do when we know something's happening, when we see something's happening, when we hear something's happening. It's really, really important that we do whatever it is we can to do that. Well, I'm excited for you to be launching this book. Where can people find it? What's the best place for them to go grab your book?
Yeah, it's in various places because I know everybody has different places they like to shop. It's obviously on Amazon. It's on bookshop.org, which is a great place to go because they give a certain percentage back to indie bookstores as well. It's on Barnes and Noble. So right now it's available online to pre-order. And if someone has a bookstore, local bookstore that they really like, my distributor it's globally available as well, but you can just ask the bookstore and they should be able to order it in for you. So it's available most everywhere.
And last and most important question, how can people find out more about you? Where should they go to learn more about you or and the work that you're doing? And especially if they need help in this area, maybe they need to hire you as a consultant or or as a coach, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I can be reached on LinkedIn. Definitely is a good way to. A lot of the folks on here would, watch who will see this are on LinkedIn, so you can reach me through there. I'm also just about everywhere on social media: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I have an author page on Facebook, so people can definitely, contact me through. Twitter, people can contact me through any of those sources.
Well, go out there and look for Dr. Lynn Schmidt. She's definitely worth following. I should pick up her book. And thank you so much for coming back to the show and being such a great guest and focusing on this really important topic. We really appreciate all your fantastic insights.
Thank you, Chris. It was great to be here.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to today's show. Hopefully you gained something you can use in your own career in a positive way. Until next time, do what you love and show the world how talented you can be today.
You've been listening to Talent Talk Radio, brought to you by People G2.